Hi, my name is Emma Boyd, and today I'll be presenting on my favorite brain part, which is the amygdala. So I actually know that we covered the amygdala when we went over the limbic system in the textbook and in the class. However, for my presentation, I am choosing to focus more on the way gender and biological sex affects the amygdala. And my inspiration came from a book called The Female Brain by Dr. Luann Brizendine, and who is a psychologist who writes about gender and the nervous system. So, to start off with, we are going to talk about just what the amygdala is. And in Latin, the amygdala actually translates to almond. And as you can see on the screen here, it looks a little bit like an almond structurally. So it's actually a small button of nuclei located in the temporal lobe, and it's a component of the limbic system, as I mentioned earlier, and it plays a role in emotion and behavior. So amygdala receives a lot of its input from the senses, and it receives it from both just tactile and auditory and those types of senses, but also visceral senses. And visceral senses are actually received from the hypothalamus and the septal area and the orbital cortex. And the sensory inputs are received from the temporal lobe and come from auditory, visual, and somatosensory information. So that diagram there is just kind of how information is processed within the limbic system, and it features the amygdala right there as well. So the amygdala is an important part of the brain because it causes intense emotion, which is actually one of the reasons it's one of my favorites. I think emotions can really shape who you are, and it's really important to pay attention to them, and it's just a really cool part of the brain. So the amygdala causes intense emotion, such as aggression, fear, and even heartbreak. So when intense emotions trigger the amygdala, anxiety often occurs, which we'll get into later. And actually, increased amygdala activity shows to be directly related to higher levels of anxiety. So even without a stimulus or the sensory input, anxiety can happen because of the amygdala. So chronic stress actually plays a big part in the amygdala and just how our body processes that. So chronic amounts of stress have actually been shown to change the neural plasticity in our brain and of the amygdala. So these changes actually cannot be reversed by a lack of stress, and so taking away that sensory input actually doesn't help, but changing habits permanently can help the amygdala deal with stress. Hypertrophy of the amygdala can lead to increased anxiety and increased aggression levels. So the more anxious you are and the higher anxiety levels you have, the more likely you are to get those again. So for what I wanted to focus on, the amygdala and gender, the main thing I wanted to point out is that men and women are a lot different in the way that they process emotion. So the amygdala receives an emotional stimulus and allows the prefrontal cortex to decide how to handle the situation. And men and women often differ in their responses, as I said. So women's amygdalas are actually more easily activated by an emotional stimulus, and the hippocampus stores these memories. So that's why a woman's more likely to memorize the details of a date or a positive emotional experience or a sad emotional experience. But on the other hand, men have a larger amygdala physiologically, so it's easier to get them angrier, and they have actually more testosterone receptors. So testosterone, we know, increases anger, so that's why they have a higher level of anger. So, and also along with this, sexual implications are actually different between a man and a woman dealing with the amygdala. So for female arousal to occur, the amygdala actually has to be completely deactivated. So therefore, women in love and in more relaxed and stable relationships can actually feel a deeper sexual desire or satisfaction with men. But for men, no deactivation must occur. So it's just a big difference in the way that they just operate, I guess. So that is actually the end of my presentation, and there are my sources, and yeah, so I hope you learned a lot about the amygdala and that you can understand why it's one of my favorite brain parts.